Imagine an ordinary day at the zoo. A calm environment, lively visitors, laughing children. But suddenly, a scream pierces the silence and everything changes. A zookeeper suddenly throws a black boy into a cage with a bear. Heart stopping, the zoo visitors can't believe their eyes. Everyone tensely awaits the inevitable tragedy. But what happened next made everyone in the zoo shudder. Before we reveal all of this incredible story, let's get to know you a little bit. Write in the comments what your name is and where you're watching this video from. We really appreciate each and every one of you. You are the real support of our channel, and it's thanks to you that our videos get so much attention. Your engagement helps us move forward and create even more exciting content for you. Every comment and like is invaluable to us, and we're glad to have you with us. Enjoy the show. It was an ordinary day at the zoo. The warm sun softly illuminated the green paths where, as always, families, friends, and visitors walked in pairs. Children's laughter and excited cheers echoed around the grounds, especially near the cages with large animals. No one knew that soon this idyll would turn into a horror that would shake everyone to the core. The crowd slowly moved from one enclosure to another, looking at the exotic creatures, majestic and dangerous. People, enjoying the tranquility, clicked their cameras, memorizing these moments. In a corner of the zoo, one of the most impressive enclosures, a spacious enclosure for a brown bear, was hidden among the foliage. Adults often stopped here, pointing out to the children the power and majesty of the beast, which usually strolled lazily through its territory, sometimes coming to the edge to gaze at the onlookers. But on this day, this particular cage will be the site of a horror no one expected. Like a premonition, a subtle sense of uneasiness hung in the air, making parents hold their children's hands tighter and watch their every step. The zoo, with its supposed tranquility, seemed to harbor something sinister, something that could happen at any moment and shatter this illusion of safety. The zoo staff, unaware of the approaching tragedy, were engaged in routine duties, not giving any thought to the fact that soon the usual course of their day would turn into something terrible that none of them would forget. There was a man among the zoo staff who had long attracted attention with his strange aloofness and cold manner of communication. His name was Victor, and although he always performed his duties faithfully, most of his colleagues felt uncomfortable with him. He didn't like to talk, rarely responded to jokes, and always kept to himself. Victor was responsible for the enclosures of large predators, bears, lions, and tigers. Many people found his indifference to visitors and animals alarming, but no one had ever thought of what he was capable of. That day, Victor moved around the territory in his usual, almost mechanical rhythm. The animals seemed to freeze under the stern gaze of his dark eyes. He always looked at them with a strange, cold condescension. Perhaps it was this aspect of his personality that led to something truly terrible happening. The boy, whose name will remain unknown, was nearby with his mother and sister. As he got closer to the bear enclosure, he grasped the bars to look into the eyes of the huge beast, which was visible in the distance. No one noticed Victor quietly approaching them, but several people standing nearby later recalled his strange, tense expression. As if moved by an invisible force, he stepped toward the boy and, grabbing him by the shoulders before anyone could stop him, lifted the child sharply in his arms and, without a word, threw him over the edge of the fence into the bear cage. The visitors froze and watched in horror as the boy's body fell to the ground in the center of the enclosure. The child's mother screamed, her cry piercing the air, overpowering the noise of the crowd. Everyone stood, paralyzed with fear, looking at what had happened, unable to grasp the reality of what had happened. It was the moment when ordinariness finally disappeared, giving way to the fear that gripped the hearts of everyone who witnessed this horrifying act. The boy was only 7 years old, and his name was Jaden. He was a lively and inquisitive child, with boundless energy and a genuine interest in everything around him. This day at the zoo was going to be a special day for him. Jaden came with his mom and older sister, who gladly agreed to spend the day off together to make his little brother happy. He wanted to see all the animals, especially the big and fearsome ones, lions, tigers, and bears. He couldn't wait to get as close as possible to see them and maybe even feel like a real wildlife researcher. His mom and sister kept an eye on him, occasionally correcting him with a smile to make sure he didn't get too close to the fences. Jaden was a little impatient, like all children his age, but his curiosity knew no bounds, and he was genuinely excited about each new enclosure. The family walked leisurely from one corner of the zoo to the next, stopping occasionally to take pictures or listen to the staff's stories. When they reached the bear enclosure, Jaden reached for the bars again, trying to see into the cage. He held on tightly to the bars, peering into the semi-darkness where the huge brown bear walked. The beast inspired fear and admiration in him at the same time, as if he was mesmerized by it, staring at him without taking his eyes off it. Neither he, nor his mother and sister, nor the other visitors had any idea that Victor was approaching behind him, the man who would do the unthinkable a moment later. It was so fast for Jaden that he didn't even have time to be frightened. One moment, strong, cold hands grabbed him by the shoulders, and then he felt the ground fall away from under his feet. A moment more, and he was falling into the cage of a huge, powerful beast that was now staring right at him. The crowd around the bear enclosure froze in horror. It was so sudden that most of the witnesses did not immediately realize what they had just seen. People stood with their hands over their mouths. Someone shrieked. Someone recoiled, not believing their own eyes. The children's laughter and the noise of an ordinary zoo day were replaced by an oppressive silence, interrupted by the occasional shrieks and heavy breathing of the spectators. Jaden's mother, realizing the horror of what had happened, rushed desperately to the fence, screaming his name. Her voice pierced the air, filling the atmosphere with unbearable tragedy. She tried to climb over the fence, her hands trembling, but the people around her held her, realizing that throwing herself into the cage was deadly. Her screams and sobs, filled with terror and maternal helplessness, caused many around her to lower their eyes and turn away, unable to bear her suffering. Someone tried to reach for his phone, but his hands were shaking and the screen slipped out of his fingers. Others were loudly discussing what had happened, asking questions no one could answer. "Who is this man? Why did he do this? What will happen to the boy?" they asked. But there were no answers, and that only made it scarier. Everyone waited, holding their breath, hoping that this was some terrible misunderstanding, that help would come and Jaden would be rescued. The little boy, one-on-one with the huge bear, became the center of attention for dozens of eyes full of fear and helplessness. People clung to the fence, craning their necks to see what would happen next, unable to look away. But with each passing moment in which no one from the staff came to help, the tension became almost unbearable. Jane was standing on the ground in the center of the enclosure, and the bear was already looking at him, as if assessing who this little intruder was. The silence in the crowd grew thicker and thicker. Everyone held their breath, not daring to move, afraid that any movement might upset the delicate balance between the beast and the boy. The bear enclosure, though carefully designed for the safety of the animals and visitors, was now suddenly transformed into a dangerous arena where a terrifying scene was unfolding. It was a large glass and steel-barred space framed by stone walls and high metal bars. Normally, Zoo visitors could safely view the huge brown bear from a safe distance, but now it suddenly made no sense. The floor of the enclosure was covered with rough, hard ground, in some places lined with boulders and large stones, among which were broken branches and old trees, creating a natural habitat for the bear. Closer to the back of the enclosure, there was a small artificial hill on which the bear liked to sit, watching the visitors from above. It was a familiar hiding place for the animal, but for the boy inside, these rocks and stones were now insurmountable barriers that cut off escape routes. The crowd stood a few meters away from the fence. People could get close to the thick glass or steel mesh and see the bear almost up close, but so far it seemed perfectly safe. After all, no one could even imagine that one of the visitors would be on the other side of the barrier. There was no secure fence between the enclosure and the spectators, capable of keeping a person out if they were there. Everything had been designed for people to be outside, not inside, and now it seemed like a terrible oversight. Every element of this enclosure, designed to keep the bear comfortable and protected, was now a potential trap for the little boy. The rocks and trees standing haphazardly left him little room for maneuver, and the shadows cast by the huge beast only added to the sense of imminent threat. The bear stood motionless, watching the boy intently, who stared back at him as if mesmerized, unaware of the danger. The bear, a massive and imposing creature with thick, dark fur, did not react at first to the boy's sudden appearance in his enclosure. He stood motionless by his favorite hill, habitually glancing at the observers behind the fence as if studying them with lazy curiosity. But Jaden's presence, small and defenseless in the center of the enclosure, disrupted the routine, and it couldn't go unnoticed for long. At first, the bear only turned his head slightly, and his dark eyes froze on the boy's figure. He blinked slowly, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing in front of him. There was an odor of fear and tension in the air, an odor that animals feel especially keenly. The bear lifted his large head, slightly raised on his hind legs, and his gaze became intense and wary. His whole being froze, focused on this new and strange guest. The crowd on the other side of the fence held its breath as the huge animal became more and more interested in the boy. There was something in the bear's eyes that made the onlookers shudder, an unpredictable and primitive curiosity mixed with wariness. The bear made a low, muffled sound, barely audible in the tense silence, and slowly lowered itself on its front paws, as if about to move closer. Little Jaden, realizing that the beast was looking right at him, froze in place. His eyes widened, and his face read a combination of fear and incomprehension. He stared at the bear, not knowing how to react, not realizing that this predator was not seeing him as a zoo guest, but as something alien and wary. There was a heavy silence between them, broken only by the bear's heavy breathing and the barely audible sobs of his mother on the other side of the fence. The bear began to tread slowly, almost silently, toward the boy, its paws gently touching the ground. The crowd involuntarily drew back, as if each step of the beast exerted an inexplicable pressure on them. The onlookers felt a growing horror, unable to turn their eyes from the scene. Jaden stood as if chained to the spot, unable to move as the huge beast approached him. Jaden felt his heart pounding furiously, each beat echoing in his ears. He couldn't take his eyes off the huge bear as it came closer and closer to him. Everything around him became a blur. His mother's cries, the deafening noises of the crowd outside the fence, the sounds of nature. All that remained was the bear, a huge, dark creature with a cold, piercing stare that was impossible to escape. The boy instinctively took a few steps backward, barely keeping his balance, and slipped for a moment on the loose soil, looking around fearfully for cover. His small hands clenched into fists, and his breathing became frequent and intermittent. He couldn't scream, couldn't call for help. Fear swept over him like a heavy blanket, constricting his movements and robbing him of his ability to think logically. It seemed to Jaden that there was nothing left in the world but this bear and himself, two beings colliding in a space where he was helpless. For a moment he thought that if he didn't move, the bear would lose interest in him and go back to its hill. He froze, gazing into the beast's eyes, trying to catch its intentions. But the predator only tensed more, stepping even closer. Jaden felt cold sweat trickling down his back and his legs shaking with fear. He wished he could be invisible, disappear, so that the beast would stop noticing him. The bear's footsteps grew firmer and firmer as he began to back away, trying not to make any sudden movements. Jaden's hand fumbled for a rock, and without thinking of the consequences, he picked it up, clutching it in his palm. He raised his hand as if it were a shield and swung, hoping to scare the beast away, or at least show that it wasn't defenseless. The small stone looked like a pathetic weapon against such a huge foe, but it was the only chance he had to feel some semblance of control over the situation. But as he looked at his opponent, the boy realized that the stone wouldn't stop him. But as he gripped it even tighter, Jaden inwardly prepared himself to do whatever he could. At this time, the zoo staff nearby finally realized the full horror of the situation unfolding before their eyes. They saw the boy desperately clutching the rock in his hand, the bear slowly approaching him, and each of them felt paralyzing fear for a moment, realizing that any action they took could lead to tragedy. An oppressive, growing panic overwhelmed the workers, who usually remained unfazed even in the face of the most difficult tasks. But now, everyone felt completely helpless. The senior zookeeper, an elderly man with years of experience working with large animals, tried to take control of the situation, but even his hands were shaking and his voice was full of anxiety. He looked at his co-workers in desperation, trying to come up with a rescue plan, but his thoughts were muddled, and every glance at the boy only added to the sense of hopelessness. He shouted to one of his co-workers to call the emergency services, but he realized that they would have to act faster than the rescuers could arrive. The young zoo workers looked around, unsure of what to do. One of them, seeing Jaden's distressed mother desperately trying to break through to the enclosure, wanted to rush to the fence and try to distract the bear, but he was stopped by his colleagues, realizing that this could only make matters worse. Another co-worker clumsily dropped his walkie-talkie, and a clanging sound echoed in the silence, attracting stares from those present. Another, more experienced, grabbed a tranquilizer gun stored in the emergency cabinet, but his hands were shaking so that he couldn't aim. He knew that with the slightest mistake, the shot could miss its target or come too late, leaving the boy alone with the enraged beast. They knew that any careless action, any sound or movement could only anger the bear and accelerate the tragedy. Their eyes were filled with confusion and fear of responsibility for someone else's life. On normal days, they might have prided themselves on their experience and knowledge of dealing with predators. But now, none of them were prepared for something like this. Their bodies were shackled with terror, and their minds clung to any idea of rescue, even the most hopeless. But every attempt to think straight seemed futile. A situation that once seemed impossible became a reality, and each of the employees felt the weight of responsibility for an innocent life that literally hung in the balance. The bear stepped slowly, almost silently, across the hard ground of the enclosure, heading straight for the boy. His every movement was measured and heavy, as if he were deliberately stalling, assessing the creature that had appeared in his space. The muscles beneath the dense, dark fur rolled slowly with each step, and the huge paws left deep footprints in the soil. It lowered its massive head, tilting it slightly, as if trying to figure out who it was in front of him, this small, trembling child with the stone in his hands. The crowd, holding its breath, watched every movement of the beast. No one dared to make a sound or take a step. Even the cries of Jaden's mother faded, leaving only her intermittent sobs. Some of the onlookers grabbed at the fence, clutching the metal bars so tightly that their knuckles turned white, trying to keep their grip on the horror. Many turned away, unable to look, but they could not bring themselves to leave. It seemed that even the air around them was thick and heavy with fear and tension that was about to break the ringing silence. Jaden stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the bear. He felt small and helpless, but he still clutched the rock, his only shield against the huge creature. His heart pounded harder and harder in his chest, but the boy could neither scream nor move, as if his body had ceased to obey him. It seemed to him that if he moved, the beast would attack at once and everything would be over in a moment. He tried to breathe, but each inhalation was difficult, as if the air around him had thickened into a viscous mass. The bear took another step, his gaze intense and almost hypnotic, as if he had a strange curiosity about this small creature in his domain. Only a few steps remained between them. The beast stopped, lifting its head slightly and smelling the boy. Its huge nostrils flared, and the bear sucked in air, catching the scent of fear that came from Jaden. The scent might have awakened the bear's hunting instinct, but now he just froze, studying the stranger. All the observers, zoo employees and visitors, stood as if bewitched, not daring to even blink. The moment seemed like an eternity. In that terrible moment, no one knew how the scene would end, and everyone's heart was ready to burst from the tension. The zoo staff, usually collected and confident in their ability to control any animal, now stood paralyzed in a complete daze. It would seem that their training and experience should have prompted immediate action, but something about this incident had struck them like an electric shock, depriving them of the ability to think and act. Each of them knew that a bear, like any wild animal, could be a deadly threat in an unpredictable situation, but none of them could dare to make the first move for fear of making things worse. One of the guards standing with a tranquilizer gun clutched the weapon so tightly that his fingers almost turned white, but he didn't fire. Tranquilizers were powerful but slow-acting, and he knew, with the wrong dosage or shot, the bear could become even more aggressive, and an attack would be inevitable. Besides, the sedative would only take a few minutes to take effect, and that was time they might not have. Any wrong action could cost the boy his life. The other employees, who tried to talk through their walkie-talkies, clutched them nervously, but they were slurring their words, pausing half-heartedly and glancing around, unsure of what to do. Their thoughts mingled in a flood of panicky ideas, none of which seemed safe. Everyone realized that any sudden movement could frighten the bear, provoke it, and make the situation worse. It seemed as if fear and the realization of responsibility literally bound their bodies and minds, preventing them from even moving. At this point, the head keeper, usually confident and calm in critical situations, stood motionless, as if in a daze. He realized that the child's life depended on his command, but he couldn't think of a way to get Jaden safely out of the enclosure while the bear was still near him. He mentally ran through every possible option, but each one came with frightening consequences that he had no solutions to. It seemed to him that any action could be his last and turn out disastrous. A stupor gradually took hold of everyone. No one wanted to take responsibility for the possible consequences. Everyone stood there, praying for a miracle and hoping that somehow the situation would resolve itself, that perhaps the bear would not be aggressive. But looking at the frightened boy and the approaching beast, they realized that there would be no miracle. The bear came close to Jaden. Its massive shadow covered the boy, and its breath, heavy and hot, was so clear that Jaden felt as if he could feel it on his skin. The beast stopped, tilted its huge head, and stared at him with its deep, dark eyes. The boy froze, clutching the small stone in his palm, unable to even move. Everyone around him held their breath, expecting the worst. However, what happened in the following moment struck everyone to the core. The bear, suddenly losing all interest in the boy as a threat or prey, slumped to the ground. He took a few steps to the side, as if to show that he was not going to attack. Then, making a low, long sound, more like a sigh, the bear sat up, keeping his eyes on the boy, but his gaze was more curious than aggressive. His powerful paws relaxed, and his massive body seemed to droop, devoid of any sign of tension. Jaden, who was ready to defend himself in any way he could despite his fear, looked at the beast in confusion. He had never expected that the bear could just sit next to him and watch him like a new, unexpected guest. The boy instinctively took a step back, but when he saw that the bear was not reacting, he froze, trying to figure out what was going on. A mixture of surprise and relief gradually appeared on the child's face. The bear seemed to sense this. He looked at Jaden again, but his gaze was neither angry nor threatening. It was as if the beast sensed something fragile and harmless near him, something that required neither attack nor defense. He just sat there, as if protecting this strange little visitor on the other side of the safe fence. It was a miracle to all who witnessed the scene. Visitors and zoo staff couldn't believe their eyes. Even Jaden's mother, still sobbing, froze, as if realizing that the threat had suddenly receded. The silence that had enveloped the crowd was filled with a new feeling, a mixture of surprise and relief. The bear wasn't going to attack. He was just there, watching, with something like a strange, almost human calm. The crowd, which a moment ago had been gripped by panic-stricken terror, began to come to its senses, gradually realizing that an imminent tragedy might be avoided. There was an almost palpable silence, and all eyes were fixed on an unusual sight. A huge brown bear, which could tear anyone in a second, was sitting next to a small boy without showing the slightest sign of aggression. Sighs and whispers began to cut through the tense air. "He won't touch him. He doesn't seem like he's going to attack," someone said in a whisper, as if afraid to frighten away the strange harmony. The people closest to the fence began to look around and shuffle from foot to foot, gradually relaxing. A few people took out their phones, not to call for help, but now they were filming, trying to capture every moment of this incredible scene. The feeling of fear was gradually replaced by curiosity, as if everyone in the crowd had witnessed a rare miracle. Even the zoo staff, who a moment ago had stood paralyzed with fear, began to exchange glances, unable to believe their eyes. They had seen many cases of animal aggression, knew how unpredictable predators could be, but what they were seeing now seemed to them completely unbelievable. Some of the spectators even ventured a little closer to the fence to get a better look at the bear and the boy. The very nature of the scene seemed to have changed. Instead of the terrible tragedy that everyone had been so afraid to see, something almost peaceful was playing out before them. It was as if the spectators were mesmerized by the strange bond that had for a moment been formed between man and animal. Jaden's mother, of course, was still staring at her son with concern and tears in her eyes, but seeing the bear's stillness, she slowly began to calm down, as if trusting the inexplicable moment. She, like everyone else, could not explain why the bear was behaving so peacefully, but her heart, filled with anxiety and maternal concern, finally began to beat a little more calmly. The bear and the boy stood side by side, as if sharing something only the two of them understood, and everyone in the crowd felt that this interaction was beyond the ordinary. People silently watched this scene as if it were a rare miracle, and the horror in their hearts gradually gave way to a sense of wonder and even admiration. The zoo staff, observing the unexpectedly peaceful scene, began to come to their senses. A moment ago, they had been convinced that any sudden movement could provoke the bear and lead to tragedy, but now, seeing that the animal did not seem intent on attacking, they realized that they had a chance to save the boy. This chance was fragile, and each of them realized that a successful rescue would require absolute caution and coordination. The chief ranger quickly assessed the situation and began to give quiet instructions to his colleagues. He knew that the bear might suddenly become alarmed at the noise, so he spoke in a low, quiet voice. The first thing he did was to order one of the co-workers to slowly approach the enclosure's emergency exit so that he could open it discreetly and give Jaden a chance to get out as soon as there was a safe moment. They knew they needed to minimize the risk of any unexpected sound that might disturb the beast. The other officer, trembling with excitement, picked up the tranquilizer gun again. This time, he was ready to shoot at any moment if the bear made a single aggressive move towards the boy. He carefully watched the animal's movements, trying to keep his distance so as not to attract its attention. The man now had calmness in his hands, and he realized that he had to be extremely accurate if a shot was needed. Meanwhile, the headkeeper stealthily approached the fence and gestured for Jaden to stay where he was, not to make any sudden movements. He tried to catch the boy's gaze, to convey calm and confidence, to make Jaden feel supported. The head ranger knew that if Jaden panicked or tried to run away, it might provoke the bear, and then all his efforts would be in vain. Other staff members began to carefully disperse the crowd to make room near the exit of the enclosure, leaving the way open for the boy if he managed to get to the exit. They tried to distract people to calm them down and create a calm environment around them, minimizing noise and excitement. The plan was simple, but risky. The staff knew that the only chance of success was to create a safe way for Jaden to get out, taking care not to disturb the bear. They all froze, ready to act at any moment, hoping that the boy would understand their signals and move carefully to get out of this deadly situation, one step at a time. They all held their breath as they watched this plan, full of risk and caution, begin to come to fruition. The bear seemed to sense the tension around him, but he was perfectly calm, not showing the slightest sign of aggression. He lowered his massive head a little and took a slow step forward, still watching Jaden intently. His nostrils flared slightly, as if he were picking up every scent coming from the boy, trying to figure out who was in front of him. Even so, his movements were measured and almost friendly, as if he were genuinely interested rather than annoyed or frightened. The bear circled around the boy, making soft guttural noises that sounded like a sort of soft rumbling. Jaden stood still, shrinking into a lump, trying not to breathe too loudly, lest he attract unwanted attention. The boy could sense the power of the huge beast, but the bear's sudden calmness gave him a sliver of hope, as if the predator, in the back of his mind, had decided that the little man was not a threat. The bear approached Jaden and gently touched his shoulder with its nose. The soft, barely perceptible contact made Jaden flinch, but he realized immediately that the bear wasn't going to hurt him. Inwardly paralyzed with fear, he even allowed himself to look directly into the beast's eyes, deep, black eyes that held no malice or aggression. Instead, he saw something almost meaningful, as if the bear was scrutinizing him and trying to figure out why he was here. The bear stepped back again, as if giving the boy space. He sat down, lazily shifting his powerful paws, and exhaled as he continued to watch Jaden with apparent calm. He seemed to be more of a guard than a predator now. The people watching relaxed even more, marveling at how the bear had apparently accepted the boy's presence as something that did not disturb his calm. The moment seemed to last forever. The bear sat there, keeping his eyes on Jaden, and the boy gradually began to believe that this huge animal would not harm him. The zoo staff, watching the bear's behavior, became convinced with each passing moment that there was a chance for rescue. The bear showed a rare calmness for a wild animal, and perhaps even something akin to curiosity. The crowd, hushed, watched this almost unreal moment. The boy and the bear sitting side by side, as if existing in their own world where aggression and threat do not exist. The zoo staff, taking advantage of the bear's moment of surprising calm, acted quickly but quietly. One of them cautiously opened the emergency exit of the enclosure and beckoned to Jaden, pointing to the narrow passage that was now his path to freedom. The boy, frightened out of his wits, gathered his strength and cautiously began to move toward the exit, still feeling the bear's gaze on him. The bear remained motionless, watching the boy slowly moving away, as if realizing that this encounter was coming to an end. Jaden finally made it to the exit. His small legs were nearly shaking from exhaustion and fear, but as soon as he was in the safe corridor, the strong arms of the staff picked him up and quickly led him away from the cage where he had just come face to face with the majestic but dangerous creature. Jaden almost didn't realize what was happening, but gradually a sense of relief and safety crept into his mind. As the boy was led out to the crowd, his mother, who had been on the verge of hysterics the whole time, rushed to him, screaming. She ran up, hugging her son as tightly as if she was afraid he would disappear from her arms again. Jaden felt her hot tears on his cheek, and for the first time in that terrible moment, he allowed himself to relax and cry. They were tears of relief and happiness that it was over and he was back with the people who loved him. The sister standing next to him could not hold back her tears either, hugging her brother as if making sure he was real and unharmed. The crowd that had been watching the drama all this time broke into applause and shouts of relief. Some onlookers also wiped away tears, while others hugged their children, realizing how fragile life can be and how important it is to appreciate every moment spent with loved ones. The zoo staff was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. They looked at each other, realizing that together they had averted a tragedy. The smiles on their faces, though strained, expressed gratitude to fate that everything had ended so peacefully. This moment of incredible family reunion touched everyone who witnessed the incident. People walked away from the enclosure feeling both relief and awe, knowing that they had witnessed not only a dangerous situation, but also an incredible display of calm on the part of a wild animal. Jaden, holding tightly to his mother, realized only one thing at that moment. He was safe, at home, with those who loved him, and this was a moment he would remember for the rest of his life. As the boy was safely removed from the cage and reunited with his family, the crowd of onlookers slowly began to come to their senses, experiencing an incredible mix of emotions. People who had been watching with bated breath were now exchanging surprised looks and the first cautious words, as if trying to find an explanation for what had just happened. Some visitors, still shaken, could not believe that the bear, one of the most dangerous predators in the zoo, had reacted so peacefully to the presence of a young boy. One man, with a slightly shaky voice, said to his friend, "I thought we were going to witness a terrible tragedy. And this is just unbelievable." His friend nodded, clutching his cell phone, on which he had managed to capture the last moments of the dramatic episode. Nearby, a woman was sobbing quietly, wiping away her tears. She held her baby in her arms, who hugged her tightly around the neck and whispered, "Thank God it's all turned out okay. It's just a miracle. Such a small and fragile child, and so close to this huge beast." Her words conveyed a sense of relief and gratitude shared by the entire crowd. People stood, exchanging short phrases and worried glances, many of them still trying to comprehend how dangerous the situation had been and how miraculously it had ended so safely. Some parents clutched their children tighter, looking into their eyes and experiencing the unsettling sense of vulnerability they felt looking at another's child in such danger. Some pondered aloud that perhaps such incidents are a sign that we don't fully understand animals and their behavior. It wasn't just a bear, it acted like it realized it was a child and that it didn't need to be harmed, an elderly man pondered while talking to his wife. Meanwhile, conversations began in the crowd about what would happen to the employee who threw the boy into the enclosure. That employee, he's just crazy. We need to find out why he did this and how this could even happen, reasoned a man standing at the exit. Many people did not understand how a zoo, where strict security is enforced, could allow such a horrible act that almost cost a child his life. The witnesses of this event, each of whom felt like a participant in the drama, went away, continuing to discuss the incredible turn of events. People whispered to each other that they would definitely tell their friends and relatives about it, without missing an opportunity to describe the miraculous rescue and the strange calmness of the bear. No one could forget the moment when, instead of the expected attack, the predator acted like a guardian or an old friend, simply letting the boy go. This day at the zoo will forever be remembered by everyone who witnessed this extraordinary story, and people parted with a sense of gratitude for being a part of such an amazing and rare event. After Jaden was returned to the arms of his family and the danger had passed, the zoo staff gathered in the administration building for an emergency discussion of what had happened. None of them could truly believe what had happened, and everyone's face showed a mixture of shock, relief, and inner turmoil. The situation demanded an immediate investigation, not only to understand what had made one of the employees commit such an act, but also to prevent something like this from happening in the future. The head caretaker who had been involved in Jaden's rescue was the first to speak. His voice, normally calm and confident, now sounded strained. He sighed heavily as he looked around at his co-workers and asked the question that plagued everyone. How could this have happened? We screened every employee before they were hired. Victor was always withdrawn, but he was doing his job. Many nodded, remembering Victor, a man with a cold, detached manner who avoided socializing and seemed to work only out of necessity. He always kept to himself, which made other employees wary, but no one suspected him of being capable of such a cruel act. Colleagues tried to understand what could have provoked him to take such a step. Maybe he had some personal problems? Perhaps he was depressed or suffering from something we didn't know about, suggested one of the caretakers. At that moment, the zoo director intervened and listened attentively to all the versions. His face expressed seriousness and determination to find out the truth. Now we need to understand how Victor passed our tests. If he had mental problems, it should have manifested itself earlier. We need to do an internal investigation, check his personal details, records, and recent behavior. I don't want to allow any more employees who are trusted with the safety of our visitors to pose a threat to them. One of the more experienced staff members recalled that Victor had recently been behaving particularly strangely. He had noticed him staring at the enclosures with large predators for long periods of time, and sometimes noticed something disturbing in his gaze. This fact increased suspicions that Victor's external reticence could hide deeper problems. The superiors decided to immediately check all the surveillance cameras to look for any hints of changes in his behavior. Meanwhile, the deputy director suggested psychological testing for all zoo employees to make sure none of them have underlying problems that could lead to such actions. We need to strengthen security measures not only for visitors, but also for the employees themselves. "This incident has shown us that we may have missed something important in maintaining the morale of our team," he said. The staff left with a heavy feeling. Each of them was both horrified by their colleague's act and incredibly relieved that the boy had survived. They realized that they now had to rebuild trust among both staff and visitors, who expected professionalism and safety from them. In the coming days, the management planned to carefully review internal rules, selection system, and employee support so that this would not happen again. The investigation at the zoo began immediately. The entire team, management, and even law enforcement were involved in looking into the incident involving Victor, an employee who had done the unthinkable and jeopardized the life of a young boy. Initial findings quickly confirmed that Victor had long shown signs of internal instability that for some reason had gone unnoticed. This shocked the management, for they trusted their screening and vetting process. Victor was immediately suspended, and the zoo issued an official statement that this behavior was in no way consistent with their mission and safety standards. Management assured the public that Victor would not return to work with animals or visitors again, and that all necessary steps would be taken to ensure that it would not happen again. It was soon followed by news that Victor was facing criminal proceedings and serious legal consequences for his behavior. However, taking action against Victor was not enough to restore public confidence. The incident quickly made the news, and the zoo became the center of attention, not in the way they were used to. Parents and visitors were shocked and outraged, demanding an accounting of how it could have happened that an employee working with dangerous animals could violate safety standards in such a way. Negative comments began to appear on social networks and on the zoo's website, in which people expressed dissatisfaction and doubts about the reliability of the zoo as a safe place for family vacations. To restore trust, the zoo management took a number of radical measures. First, a program of mandatory psychological support was introduced for all employees. Psychologists began to conduct individual consultations with employees to identify signs of stress or other problems in a timely manner. Secondly, additional tests for stress resistance and mental health were introduced for all those who already work or only plan to work at the zoo. In addition, the zoo strengthened its security measures by installing additional video surveillance cameras, reinforcing access control to areas with large predators, and organizing stricter supervision of employee behavior. The new security system also included additional training for employees so that in the future they would be able to respond quickly and competently to any emergency situations. Although the measures taken began to gradually restore public confidence, the zoo had a difficult time. Visitor traffic declined markedly over the following months, and some sponsors temporarily suspended funding out of fear for their reputation. Management had to hold press conferences and outreach talks to reassure people that the situation was under control and would not happen again. Nevertheless, for the zoo team, the event left a deep scar. This incident reminded each of them of the fragility of safety and the responsibility they have not only for the animals but also for all those who entrust them with their safety. As soon as news of the zoo incident spread, the media picked up the story, turning it into the top story of the day. Headlines screamed, "Shocking incident," and "Zoo employees' madness," and the news caused a storm of emotion among the public. Reports were accompanied by footage of the boy's rescue, and interviews with shocked visitors present that day made the situation even more dramatic. The event became the subject of heated discussions, sometimes turning into accusations, and sometimes into calls for a review of security policies at zoos around the world. A real wave of indignation and concern erupted in social networks. Parents, bloggers, and even well-known figures began to share their opinions about what had happened. Some users demanded stricter inspections of zoo employees and stronger security measures, pointing out that the lives of children and the safety of visitors should be an absolute priority. The hashtag #SafetyAtZoo gained popularity, bringing together hundreds of posts, discussions, and suggestions on how to prevent similar situations in the future. Several major news channels ran reports with experts discussing how this could have happened and what should have been done to prevent it. Psychologists made comments that zoos should closely monitor the psychological well-being of their employees, especially those who work with large carnivores. Other safety experts said the incident exposed serious gaps in supervision and required fundamental changes in zoo management. At the same time, some animal rights organizations took advantage of the situation to raise the issue of keeping animals in zoos. They argued that captive large carnivores become more unpredictable, and that such incidents only emphasize how dangerous it is to keep them in unnatural conditions. The call to release animals from zoos and to seek alternative methods of keeping them was growing louder and louder, adding another side to the public debate. The zoo management realized that the situation was beyond their control. They issued an official statement detailing all the measures taken after the incident and assured that they would do everything possible to ensure that such events would never happen again. Zoo representatives even invited journalists on a private tour of the territory to demonstrate the new security measures introduced after the incident. However, this only partially reassured the public. People were still discussing the incident, and many doubted whether the zoo should be trusted again. While the news about the zoo stayed on TV screens and social media pages, public attention began to focus on broader zoo safety and management issues. The case was the catalyst for a review of many rules and standards at other zoos around the country. Some cities began conducting surprise inspections to make sure that such incidents could not happen at other institutions. The public and media reaction to the Jayden incident was so loud that it called into question the entire system of zoo operations, affecting not only their safety, but also their approach to employee training, animal care, and maintaining the psychological health of employees. The incident with Jayden was a serious test for the zoo, and its management realized that they would not be able to return to their previous standards of operation. This incident forced them to review every detail of their procedures and implement major changes to ensure maximum safety for all visitors and staff. The first thing the zoo did was to strengthen the personnel selection process. Now, in addition to standard interviews, each new employee is required to undergo detailed psychological tests to assess their stress tolerance, emotional state, and motivation. These tests have also become mandatory for those who already work at the zoo. Now employees undergo them regularly. Psychologists counsel all those who work with the animals and provide the necessary support to maintain their mental health. New protocols for employee behavior when working with large carnivores and enclosures were also introduced. The zoo has introduced stricter measures to control access to particularly dangerous areas, restricting access even to certain employees. Now only the most experienced and proven employees can approach the enclosures with predators, and their presence is always monitored by video surveillance and a special access registration system. The management has also added more cameras to the area to keep an eye on every corner of the zoo. In case of any out-of-the-ordinary behavior by employees or visitors, the security team receives instant alerts, allowing them to respond immediately to potential danger. A system of panic buttons located at strategic locations has also been introduced so that in case of an emergency, employees and visitors can promptly report a threat. Huge attention was paid to staff training. The zoo has developed a program of regular trainings for all employees, where they learn how to act in extreme situations, what to do in case of enclosure violations, and how to deal with aggressive or disoriented animals. These trainings are conducted with the involvement of professional animal behaviorists and psychologists, who teach the staff to remain calm and act coherently even in the most difficult conditions. In addition to internal changes, zoo management decided to be more open and honest with visitors to regain their trust. They started to conduct open tours, demonstrating the introduced security measures, and organized a series of public interaction events. The zoo installed safety information boards describing basic rules of behavior near the enclosures and how to contact staff in case of any incident. The management also opened a hotline where anyone could call and ask questions about safety measures. This incident changed the zoo forever. It became not just a lesson, but an incentive to create a new level of security that would help protect visitors and employees alike. By restoring trust, the zoo promised to maintain high standards, recognizing its responsibility to people and animals. With each passing day, visitors returned feeling that the zoo had indeed taken steps to ensure their safety. This incident, filled with horror and relief, reminded everyone of the importance of responsibility and caution. As a result, the zoo became not just a place of entertainment, but an example of reliability, care, and professionalism, where the lessons of the past were heeded and everything possible was done to make the future safe. Dear viewers, what do you think about what happened in this story? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We look forward to hearing your feedback. Have you had an experience with injustice or racism? Share if you feel comfortable talking about it. It's really important for us to hear from each and every one of you. You are very important to us, and we sincerely appreciate each and every one of you. Your support is what keeps us moving forward, creating more and more interesting and informative content for you. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give us a like to support us. We wish you a great day and remind you, each of your comments and feedback is invaluable to us.